The question is, how big of a threat are recent protests to Iran's Islamic Republic? Iran has had a long history of protests. Ever since the Islamic Republic was first brought about in 1977, when protests overthrew the Shah, the Islamic Republic of Iran has underwent several historic conflicts, such as the Iran-Iraq War and the sanctioning of its country by the United States. However, in recent years, protests have begun picking up. In 2022, the death of a woman held in captivity for taking off her hijab has sparked off a massive wave of protests that seem to have gripped the entire country. Seeing as how these protests have reached a scale of historic magnitude, we must ask ourselves the question, how big of a threat are recent protests to Iran's Islamic Republic? And the answer is that they are big enough to cause regime change, because first, the government is not willing to compromise. Secondly, the government is split on what to do, and lastly, allies of Iran are dealing with their own problems. Starting with my first point, according to the Wall Street Journal on September 28, 2022, a growing majority of the country is becoming secular and opposed to the government's laws mandating hijabs. When surveyed, it was found that the majority of young Iranians, including even some conservative Iranians, opposed the government's policy of having a mandatory hijab. However, despite this opposition, the article goes on to talk about how hardliners in the government absolutely do not want to change these laws, because the Iranian government is founded not on popular demand, but rather on repression. The government has, therefore, doubled down on its approach against the protests by arresting over 1,000 and killing several tens of protesters. What this shows is that the government, despite increasing public pressure against its laws, seems to be completely unwilling to compromise, and is instead doubling down on its tactics. This shows that the Iranian government is not only standing on increasingly looser footing, but is also seemingly not willing to give in to the demands of the protesters, forcing them to go to even more extreme ends, which could end in regime change as the final nail in the coffin. Secondly, according to Reuters on September 30th, 2022, Iran's government is split with rumors of Khomeini's failing health. This is because the 83-year-old supreme leader of Iran has been rumored for some time to have had failing health. In addition to this is happening at the same time as these major protests, which, when combined together, could create the perfect storm for the political instability in the top levels of Iranian government that would allow protesters to seize the chance and overthrow the government. While Iranian armed forces still remain seemingly loyal to the government itself is split on both what to do and who to support, as both the current president and the son of Khomeini are both potential candidates and have their own respective factions in Iran's government for leadership. Lastly, according to the European Council on Foreign Affairs, a pan-European think tank for EU foreign policy, on September 2nd, 2022, Iran has historically relied heavily on Russia for its own benefit. Iran, for example, helps Russia by using its own drones to spy on Ukraine and give Russian military information. In exchange, Khomeini sees Russia as a useful tool in order to reject Western influence and forges closer ties historically with Russia through military and energy deals. However, with Russia bogged down in the slog that is Ukraine, and with victory looking less and less likely for Russia day by day, this really does beg the question of how much use can Russia be to Iran's current government at the present, especially with how much the Russian government has bailed out Iran in the past from similar situations. It is looking less and less likely that Russia can be the solid ally that Iran currently needs in order to maintain its Islamic Republic, and looking more and more like Russia will simply leave Iran to its own fate, as it just does not have the resources to do so. Thus, because of these three reasons: first, the government not willing to compromise; second, the government being split on the protests; and lastly, the allies of Iran having to deal with their own instability, the answer to the question how big of a threat the recent protests are to Iran's Islamic Republic is that they are big enough to cause regime change, and will do so if the Iranian government does not fix its act. Thank you.